She stood in the freezing rain, her hand resting over a secret swelling in her womb as the man she loved declared her a traitor. 5 winters later, the ruthless Alpha King stared down at a filthy, snarling rogue child, only to see his own unmistakable golden eyes glaring back. The great hall of Ethelgard was steeped in an unnatural, suffocating silence. Torches flickered against the ancient damp stone walls, casting long, distorted shadows across the faces of the Alpha Council. At the head of the heavy oak table sat King Cedric of House Redfern, his expression carved from the very ice that encased the castle outside. His eyes, one a striking, luminous gold, the other as pale and cold as winter ice, were fixed entirely on the woman kneeling before him. Genevieve of Croft, his mate, his Luna, and now, supposedly, his betrayer. "The evidence is irrefutable, Genevieve." Cedric's voice boomed, devoid of the warmth that used to wrap around her in the dark of night. The heavy timbre of his Alpha command forced the lesser wolves in the room to lower their gazes, but Genevieve kept her chin high, despite the violent trembling in her limbs. Beside the king stood Lord Reginald, the king's most trusted adviser, holding a scroll bearing the broken wax seal of the southern warlords. "A letter of conspiracy," Reginald sneered, his lip curling in disgust. "Addressed to the rogue leader Caelan, detailing the layout of our armory and the patrol shifts of the king's personal guard. Written by your hand, Lady Genevieve." "It is a forgery!" Genevieve cried out, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She strained against the heavy iron chains binding her wrists. "Cedric, please, you must listen to me. I would never betray you. I would never betray our pack." She looked desperately at her mate, begging for his wolf to recognize the truth in her words. But Cedric's wolf was walled off, buried beneath a fortress of wounded pride and engineered paranoia. For weeks, the poison had been dripped into his ear. Stepping from the shadows behind the throne was Isolde of the Winterborn clan. Isolde's family held immense wealth that Ethelgard desperately needed after the famine of the previous decade. Isolde's delicate hand rested ever so lightly on the back of Cedric's carved chair. "A Luna must be beyond reproach, my king," Isolde murmured, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "To harbor a traitor in your bed, it makes the kingdom look weak. It invites rebellion." Genevieve's heart shattered. She could see the exact moment Cedric made his decision. The muscle in his jaw feathered, and his broad shoulders stiffened beneath his heavy fur mantle. "I gave you my mark," Cedric said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet register. He stepped down from the dais, his heavy leather boots echoing on the flagstones, until he stood towering over her. "I elevated you from a fallen house, and you repaid my mercy with treason. Cedric, I am carrying." Genevieve started the truth of her pregnancy, bubbling up in a desperate bid to save her life. She had only discovered it 3 days ago. The kingdom's heir was growing inside her. Silence. Cedric roared, his golden eye flashing with sudden, terrifying fury. The sheer force of his dominance forced Genevieve to physically bow forward, gasping for air. "Do not attempt to manipulate me with lies. Lord Reginald has scoured your chambers. The scent of Caelan's messengers lingers on your cloaks." It was a setup. A brilliant, flawless setup orchestrated by Reginald and Isolde to remove her and clear the path for a more politically advantageous union. Genevieve looked into Cedric's mismatched eyes and realized the horrifying truth: the man she loved was already gone, replaced by a ruthless monarch who trusted his counsel over his own soul. "I, King Cedric of Ethelgard," he began, the words echoing with a terrible binding magic, "do hereby strip Genevieve of Croft of her title as Luna. I sever the pack bond. You are banished from these lands. If you are found within the borders of Ethelgard by the next moonrise, you will be hunted down and executed as a rogue. The severance of a pack bond is not merely a legal decree, it is a physical tearing of the soul. Genevieve screamed as a searing, blinding pain ripped through her chest. It felt as though a hot iron was being dragged across her heart, burning away the invisible tether that connected her to Cedric, to the pack, to the very earth of her home. Blood dripped from her nose as she collapsed onto the cold stone floor, gasping through the agony. Cedric flinched his hand, flying to his own chest, but he quickly masked his pain with a stoic scowl. "Take her to the border," he commanded his guards, turning his back on her completely. "Throw her into the Whispering Woods." The guards hoisted her up roughly by her chains. As she was dragged backward toward the heavy oak doors, Genevieve didn't cry. She stared at Cedric's broad back, her hand moving instinctively to shield her flat stomach. "You have thrown away everything, Cedric," she thought, the final embers of her love turning to hard, bitter ash. "But you will not take my child. I will survive." The heavy doors slammed shut, sealing her fate, and casting her out into the unforgiving jaws of the worst winter the realm had seen in a century. Survival in the Whispering Woods was a cruel game, one that pregnant, packless females were not meant to win. For weeks, Genevieve wandered the frozen skeletal trees, her boots wearing thin, her body pushed to the absolute limits of endurance. She scavenged for frozen berries, fought off rabid coyotes with heavy branches, and slept, huddled in shallow caves, sustained only by the primal fierce instinct to protect the tiny life growing inside her. It was on the brink of starvation, collapsed in a snowbank, that she was found by Gideon. Gideon was a massive, scarred wolf, missing half an ear, and walking with a heavy limp, the leader of a hidden rogue settlement known as Oakhaven. Unlike the feral rogues that haunted the borders, Oakhaven was a sanctuary for the discarded, the banished, the wrongly accused, the runaways. Gideon took her in. Under the canopy of the deep woods, safe from the king's patrols, Genevieve traded her royal silks for rough spun wool. She learned to skin rabbits to set traps, and to fight with a short sword. When the spring thaw finally came, breaking the icy grip on the world, Genevieve gave birth in a small wooden cabin surrounded by the rough, calloused hands of the rogue women who had become her new sisters. She named him Leon. When he opened his eyes for the first time, the entire room fell dead silent. Staring up at Genevieve from his swaddling blankets was a gaze she thought she would never see again. One eye a brilliant, luminous gold, the other as pale and cold as winter ice. He was the absolute image of his father. 5 years later, the kingdom of Ethelgard was rotting from the inside out. King Cedric sat on his throne, but the crown felt heavier with every passing season. He had taken Isolde as his Luna, exactly as the council had planned. But the union was a cursed one. Isolde was cruel, demanding, and most concerningly to the pack baron. 5 years and there was no heir. Without a pup to anchor the king's bloodline, the pack magic was thinning. Crops failed. The border skirmishes grew more frequent. Cedric himself had become a ghost of a man, known for his violent temper and prolonged, isolated hunting trips. He slept little, haunted by vivid, suffocating nightmares of a woman screaming as a bond snapped, and the phantom scent of rain and lilacs Genevieve scent. "My king!" Lord Reginald's voice broke Cedric out of his dark reverie. "The border patrols report increased rogue activity near the Whispering Woods. Poachers are taking our deer." Cedric stood up abruptly, desperate for an excuse to leave the suffocating walls of the castle and Isolde's shrill complaints. "Prepare my horse and a dozen guards. I will handle these poachers myself." The forest was dense and humid, the midsummer heat pressing down on the hunting party. Cedric rode at the front, his senses sharp, his wolf restless beneath his skin. His wolf had never forgiven him for what he did to their mate. For 5 years, the beast had been a sullen, angry presence in his mind, occasionally lashing out in bursts of uncontrollable aggression. As they rode deeper into the unmarked territory near the edge of the Whispering Woods, Cedric caught a scent that made his blood run cold. It was faint, buried under the smell of pine and damp earth, but his wolf instantly lunged forward in his mind, clawing at his ribs. Pine. Wildflowers. Rain. "Halt!" Cedric commanded, raising a hand. The guard stopped their horses. Cedric dismounted his boots, sinking into the soft moss. "Stay here. I track this alone." He followed the scent, moving silently through the thick underbrush. The air grew heavier. He heard the sound of a struggle ahead, a low, feral snarl, and the distinct clatter of wood hitting stone. Cedric drew his silver-hilted dagger and crept forward, parting the heavy fern leaves to peer into a small clearing. What he saw stopped the breath in his lungs. A massive rabid boar was cornering a wounded timber wolf in the brush. Standing between the towering, frothing beast and the injured animal was a child. He couldn't have been more than 5 years old. The boy was dressed in ragged, patched leather, his dark hair wild and unkempt. But what shocked Cedric was the boy's stance. The child held a sharpened wooden spear, his small legs planted firmly in the dirt, refusing to back down. The aura radiating from the tiny boy was raw, unpolished alpha command. The boar charged. Without thinking, Cedric burst from the bushes. In a blur of motion, he intercepted the beast, plunging his silver dagger deep into the boar's neck. The massive animal squealed, thrashing violently, before collapsing into the dirt dead. Cedric stood up, wiping the blood from his blade onto his trousers, his chest heaving. He turned slowly to look at the boy, expecting tears, fear, or gratitude. Instead, the boy had his wooden spear raised, pointing it directly at the king's chest. "I had him." The boy growled his voice, a surprising gravelly rasp for a child. "I didn't need your help, castle dweller." Cedric frowned, amused, despite himself. "You have courage, pup, but that beast would have torn you in half." "I am not a pup," the boy spat, taking a step forward to defensively shield the injured wolf behind him. "I am the protector of my mother, and you are trespassing on our hunting grounds." Cedric took a step closer, the dappled sunlight breaking through the canopy and falling directly onto the boy's dirty, fierce face. As the light hit the child's features, the king froze. The dagger slipped from Cedric's hand, hitting the ground with a dull thud. The boy, glaring back at him, had his mother's raven hair and aristocratic nose, but his eyes. One was a brilliant, luminous gold, the other as pale and cold as winter ice. Cedric's heart stopped beating. The air was sucked from the clearing. He fell to his knees in the dirt, ignoring the mud soaking through his royal breeches, unable to tear his gaze away from the impossibility standing before him. The boy smelled of wildflowers, rain, and him. "Who?" Cedric choked out his voice, trembling so violently he barely recognized it. "Who is your mother?" Before the boy could answer, a sharp, panicked voice rang out from the edge of the clearing, carrying a scent that brought Cedric's wolf to its knees, in utter submission. "Leon, get away from him." Cedric slowly turned his head. Standing at the edge of the brush, holding a drawn hunting bow, with an arrow pointed straight at Cedric's heart, was Genevieve. She was hardened, clad in leather armor, her face dirt-smudged, and older, but still breathtakingly beautiful. Genevieve Orr. Cedric breathed the name, tasting like ash and salvation on his tongue. She pulled the bowstring tighter, her eyes blazing with an ancient, unforgiving hatred. If you take one more step toward my son, Alpha King, I will put this arrow through your throat." The tension in the clearing was thick enough to suffocate. The drawn bowstring in Genevieve's hands groaned under the immense pressure the iron tip of the arrow locked unwaveringly on the hollow of Cedric's throat. "Genevieve." Cedric repeated the word, stumbling from his lips. He ignored the weapon trained on him. He ignored the mud seeping into his clothes. His mismatched eyes, one gold, one ice, were entirely consumed by the sight of her. The pampered, delicate Luna he had banished was gone. In her place stood a warrior forged in the brutal fires of survival. "Do not speak my name." Genevieve snarled, her voice vibrating with an ancient, untamed fury. "You have no right to it. Step away from my son." "Your son?" Cedric's gaze flicked to the boy Leon, who was still brandishing his wooden spear, standing fiercely between the king and the injured wolf. The child's chest heaved, his mismatched eyes glaring with raw defiance. Cedric's heart seized violently in his chest. He's mine. He is my heir." "He is nothing to you," Genevieve roared, stepping forward, the arrow never wavering. "You threw us into the snow to die, Cedric. You looked me in the eye as I begged for our child's life, and you chose the whispers of snakes over the truth of your own mate." "I didn't know," Cedric whispered, a tear finally breaking free and cutting a clean path through the dirt on his cheek. "Genevieve, the letters, the scent of the rogues on your cloaks." "A lie," she spat. "A pathetic amateur lie. Do you know who I met in these woods during my first winter, Kalen? The real rogue leader. When my new pack captured him, I asked him about the letters. He laughed in my face. "Cedric," he said, "Lord Reginald paid his men to rub their scent on my garments in the castle laundry. Reginald orchestrated the entire forgery, so Isolde could take my place and funnel Ethelgard's gold to the Winterborn clan." The revelation struck Cedric like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs, leaving him dizzy and hollowed out. Reginald, his most trusted advisor. Isolde, his so-called Luna. They had not only betrayed him, they had manipulated him into executing his own soul. My king. The heavy thud of hooves and the clatter of armor shattered the moment. Cedric's 12 royal guards burst into the clearing, their swords drawn at the sight of their monarch on his knees before an armed rogue. "Drop your weapon, rogue!" the captain shouted, spurring his horse toward Genevieve. "Halt!" Cedric roared, his alpha aura exploding outward with such terrifying concussive force that the guard's horse reared, nearly throwing its rider. Cedric scrambled to his feet, placing himself deliberately between his guards and Genevieve. He faced his men, his eyes blazing with a lethal, unhinged light. "Sheathe your weapons. If a single blade is raised against her, or the boy, I will tear the offender's throat out with my teeth." The guards froze, terrified by the sheer ferocity of their king. Slowly trembling, they lowered their swords. Cedric turned back to Genevieve, his expression softening into one of absolute agonizing regret. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, opening his arms, leaving his chest completely exposed to her arrow. "Genevieve," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please, I was a fool. A blind, arrogant fool. But I know the truth now. Come back to Ethelgard. Bring our son home. I will restore you. I will give you everything." Genevieve didn't lower the bow. Instead, a cold, bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Restore me. You think you can undo 5 years of starvation and terror with an apology. You think you can heal a severed mate bond with a crown." Cedric flinched as if struck. The severed bond, the magical tether he had violently snapped in the great hall. "You broke us, Cedric," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that cut deeper than any blade. You tore my soul in half. I bled for weeks. I nearly lost Leon because my body was collapsing from the trauma of your rejection." "I can fix it," Cedric begged, taking another step. "I will spend the rest of my life making it right." "No," Genevieve said firmly. "You won't." Suddenly, the dense underbrush around the clearing began to rustle. From the shadows emerged the wolves of Oakhaven. Dozens of them, massive and scarred, their teeth bared in silent warning. At the front was Gideon, the scarred alpha, walking with his heavy limp but radiating undeniable power. He stepped beside Genevieve, his massive grey wolf form pressing protectively against her leg. Cedric's wolf snarled at the sight of another alpha, so close to his mate, but the king forced his beast down. He was hopelessly outnumbered, and he knew it. "Leon," Genevieve commanded softly. "Come." The boy slowly backed away from Cedric, his small hand resting on the neck of the injured timber wolf, guiding it back toward the safety of the rogue pack. He stopped beside his mother, looking up at Cedric one last time. There was no recognition in the child's eyes, only the wary caution of a wild animal observing a threat. "You made your choice 5 years ago, King Cedric," Genevieve said, finally lowering her bow. "Go back to your barren kingdom. Go back to the snakes you chose to sleep with. We are not your family." With a final devastating glare, Genevieve turned her back on him. The rogue wolves formed a protective wall around her, and the boy melting seamlessly back into the shadows of the whispering woods. Cedric stood in the clearing for a long, agonizing hour, the scent of wildflowers and rain slowly fading into nothingness. When he finally turned back to his guards, the sorrow in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a cold, murderous wrath that would soon bathe his castle in blood. The heavy oak doors of the great hall exploded inward, splintering off their iron hinges with a deafening crash. The Alpha Council, deep in debate, fell dead silent. At the head of the table sat Luna Isolde, adorned in heavy silks and a crown of winter jewels. Beside her stood Lord Reginald, whispering in her ear. King Cedric strode into the hall soaked in rain and caked in mud. He did not look like a monarch. He looked like a god of war descended from the heavens to enact judgment. His royal guards poured in behind him, sealing the shattered doors and drawing their broadswords. "Cedric, my love, what is the meaning of this?" Isolde gasped, standing up, her hands fluttering to her throat in mock shock. "Why are you covered in filth?" "Guards," Cedric commanded, his voice unnervingly calm, echoing off the stone walls. "Arrest Lord Reginald and strip that woman of her crown." Chaos erupted. Reginald lunged for his sword, but 3 guards tackled him to the flagstones, pressing heavy iron boots into his back. Isolde shrieked as a guard seized her arms violently, tearing the jeweled crown from her head. It clattered uselessly onto the stone. "Are you mad?" Reginald spat, struggling against his restraints. "I am your chief advisor. I am a traitor." Cedric interrupted, walking slowly toward the dais. He drew his silver-hilted dagger, the same one he had used to kill the boar, and slammed it point first into the heavy oak table right between Isolde and Reginald. "You paid the rogue Kaelin to falsify the treason letters. You framed my true mate. You severed my bloodline, poisoned my pack's magic, and funneled my kingdom's wealth into the Winterborn coffers." Isolde's face drained of color. "Lies who told you this. Some feral beast in the woods, the woman you tried to murder." Cedric growled, leaning in until he was inches from Isolde's trembling face. "And my son, who is very much alive." A collective gasp echoed through the council. An heir. The king had an heir. The penalty for high treason against the crown and the attempted murder of a pregnant Luna is death. Cedric declared, his voice booming with the alpha command that forced the entire room to their knees. He turned to the guards holding Reginald. "Take him to the courtyard. Take his head. Mount it on a spike facing the whispering woods so the crows can feast on his deceit." Reginald screamed as he was dragged away, his pleas echoing down the stone corridors until they were abruptly cut short. Cedric turned his mismatched gaze to Isolde, who was now weeping on her knees. "As for you, your family's wealth will be seized to rebuild what you have ruined. You will be stripped of your titles, your wealth, and your pack name. You will be banished to the barren tundras of the north. If you are ever seen within 100 leagues of Ethelgard, you will join Reginald on the spikes." The justice was swift, brutal, and absolute. Within an hour the castle was purged of the rot that had infected it for 5 years. But as Cedric sat alone on his cold iron throne, the crown felt heavier than ever. Vengeance did not heal the gaping wound in his chest. Vengeance did not bring back the smell of wildflowers. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, King Cedric did the unthinkable. He rode back to the edge of the whispering woods, but he brought no guards. He wore no crown, no royal furs, no heavy armor. He wore a simple tunic and worn leather trousers. He walked into the dense forest alone. He didn't track them. He simply let his wolf howl a long, mournful sound of submission and grief, broadcasting his location to the entire forest. Hours passed. The sun dipped below the horizon. Finally the shadows parted, and Gideon the scarred rogue Alpha stepped into the moonlight. Behind him stood a dozen wolves, and behind them Genevieve. Cedric didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees in the dirt. He bowed his head, exposing his neck entirely, the ultimate sign of a wolf's submission. "I am not here as a king." Cedric spoke to the dirt, his voice thick with emotion. "I am here as a broken man. I have executed Reginald. I have banished Isolde. The kingdom is safe, but I am nothing without my mate. I am nothing without my son." Genevieve stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "I told you, Cedric. You cannot undo what is done. The bond is broken." "Then let me build a new one," Cedric pleaded, finally lifting his head to look at her. The tears flowed freely now, unashamed. "I will not ask you to return to the castle. I will not ask you to be Luna. Let me stay here. Let me hunt for you. Let me protect your borders. Let me earn the right to simply speak to my son. Even if it takes 100 years, Genevieve. Let me earn you back." The silence stretched on thick and heavy. The rogue wolves looked to Genevieve, waiting for her command to either execute the fallen king or let him be. From behind Genevieve's legs, young Leon peeked out. His mismatched eyes, the exact mirror of Cedric's, studied the large, weeping man on his knees. "Mama," Leon whispered, his gravelly voice carrying in the quiet night. "Is he the one who gave me my eyes?" Genevieve looked down at her son, the fierce armor around her heart, cracking just a fraction. She stroked Leon's dark hair, then looked back at Cedric. She saw the absolute devastation in him, the complete death of his arrogant pride. "You will not live in the camp," Genevieve said, her voice stern but lacking the venom from the day before. "You will build your own shelter on the outskirts. You will hunt for the elders. You will speak to Leon only when he approaches you. If you break a single rule, Gideon will tear you apart, and I will help him." Cedric gasped, a sob of profound relief breaking from his chest. "Yes, yes, whatever you ask, I swear it." "You have a long road ahead of you, Cedric," she said, her eyes softening just enough to give him a sliver of hope. "Do not make me regret this." As Genevieve and the rogues turned back into the forest, Leon lingered for a moment. He looked at the man on his knees, then reached into his pocket and tossed a small, carved wooden wolf onto the dirt in front of Cedric. "You can carve me a better one tomorrow," the boy commanded, with baby Alpha authority, before turning and running after his mother. Cedric picked up the small wooden toy, clutching it to his chest as if it were the most precious jewel in the realm. The bond was severed, the past was ruined, but as he sat in the dirt of the Whispering Woods, the king smiled for the first time in 5 years. He was finally home. And so, the ruthless Alpha King gave up his pride for a place in the dirt, hoping to rebuild the family he destroyed. But is a king's grovel enough to heal 5 years of heartbreak? If you loved this epic tale of betrayal, revenge and redemption, smash that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more dramatic werewolf romance. Tell me in the comments, did Cedric earn his second chance, or should Genevieve have left him behind?